The night air was cold and full of metal dust. Neon lights flickered above the narrow alley where Jace's small diner stood forgotten. It was the last food place in Dock Sector 7, where broken bots came to die, and nobody smiled anymore. Jace, a tired human in his late 30s, wiped the last plate of the night. He was about to lock the back door when something strange caught his nose. Not trash, not oil. Something delicious. He paused, sniffing again. There was spice in the air, warm and sharp like red pepper mixed with something sweet. He stepped outside, boots crunching on gravel. The alley was dark, quiet. But there, behind the dumpster, thin smoke rose like fingers reaching for the stars. Jace moved closer, slowly. His hand rested near the stun baton on his belt, just in case. Then he saw her, a small figure crouched low, hidden under a ragged gray cloak. Her hands shook as she stirred a small pot over a rusty fuel can. Bits of scavenged metal held the pot up, and inside it, strange vegetables boiled, with a glowing blue root. The smell hit Jace again. It was beautiful. She turned fast when she heard his step, her face hidden in the shadow of her hood. Then, soft and scared, she whispered, "Please, don't call security. I can cook for you, human." Jace froze. That voice, it was delicate, musical but full of fear. He saw her eyes under the hood, deep violet, glowing slightly in the dark. Definitely not human, definitely not legal. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice low. She hesitated, then answered, "Sela. Why are you here?" "I was hungry," she whispered, looking down. "They threw out old roots behind your diner. I used them." She pushed the pot away and stood up as if ready to run. "I'll go," she said, voice trembling. "Just don't hand me over." Jace looked at her small frame, at the sharp fingers wrapped in old bandages. She looked like she hadn't eaten a full meal in days, and she could cook. That pot, whatever it was, it smelled better than anything he had served all week. He made a quick choice. "Come inside," he said, nodding toward the door. "What?" She blinked, unsure she heard him right. "You said you can cook, right?" he replied. "Then let's see what you can do with a real kitchen." Her eyes widened, and for a second, something lit up behind them. Hope, maybe? She picked up the pot, carefully balancing it, and followed him into the diner. Inside, the diner was silent, filled with old chrome counters, flickering menu boards, and dusty booths. Jace led her to the kitchen, small but clean. "This is it," he said. "Not much, but better than a dumpster." Sila stepped in like she was walking on holy ground. Her fingers ran along the counter as if she was remembering something from long ago. She looked at the spice rack, basic stuff, salt, pepper, dried onion, and garlic flakes. Then she reached into a hidden pouch in her cloak and pulled out small packets, alien herbs, glowing powders, and silver oils. "You trust me?" she asked quietly. Jace shrugged. "I'm hungry too," he said. "Let's cook." For the next hour, she moved like wind. She sliced fast, tossed spices into boiling broth, and roasted alien roots with garlic oil. Jace watched in silence as smells filled the kitchen. Rich, wild, deep. He had never seen anything like it. When she was done, she handed him a small bowl. It was purple soup, steam curling from it like dancing mist. He tasted it, and everything stopped. It was spicy, warm, and full of life. 1,000 memories hit him at once: childhood, home, laughter, peace. He looked at her with new eyes. "You're hired," he said, voice thick with emotion. She smiled, but before she could answer, click. The sound came from outside. A black hover car had parked across the alley. 2 figures stepped out, dark uniforms carrying scanners. Jace cursed under his breath. "They're looking for me," she whispered, eyes wide with panic. "Hide," he said, pointing to the pantry. She ran, light on her feet, and disappeared behind sacks of flour. Jace stepped out back, shutting the kitchen door behind him. "Can I help you?" he asked, his face calm. The taller officer looked him over. "Surveillance picked up heat signatures. Near this building," the man said. "You running any extra staff tonight?" Jace shook his head. Just me like always. He lied. Making stew for tomorrow. The officer looked past him, eyes scanning. Then after a pause, he nodded. Stay safe, sir. And they left. Jace waited until the hovercar vanished in. The smog. Then he returned to the kitchen and opened the pantry. Scylla stood there, her body trembling, hands tight against her chest. But her eyes were burning. Not with fear now, but something stronger. You didn't give me up, she said softly. No, he replied. And I won't. And just like that, something unspoken passed between them. Something new was beginning. Right there. Behind. The smoke and the stew. The lights in the diner hummed softly as the sky outside turned darker. Scylla stood in the corner of the kitchen, arms still wrapped around herself. She didn't speak much after the patrol left. But Jace noticed something. Change in her eyes. It wasn't just fear now, it was hunger. Not just for food, but for trust, for safety. You hungry? He asked gently, picking up a bowl from the shelf. She looked at him and nodded once. Jace filled the bowl with leftover stew and handed it to her. It was simple. Potatoes, beans, and thin slices of meat. But her hands shook as she held it, like it was the first real meal she'd ever touched. She sat at the metal counter and ate slowly. Every spoonful seemed to fill her eyes with something close to disbelief, like she didn't expect the warmth to be real. Jace didn't interrupt, he just watched, and when her bowl was half empty, she finally spoke. I wasn't always like this, she said quietly. I used to wear silk robes and cook in golden pots. Jace blinked. You were rich? No, she shook her head. But I cooked for the rich, the powerful, the House of Seren. He had heard of them, an ancient alien family known for wealth, art, and cruelty. Their chefs were famous across sectors, but they were also tightly controlled. Property, not people. What happened? He asked, pulling up a stool. Scylla took another bite before she answered. I made a dish for the youngest heir, she said. He asked for something new, something bold, so I gave him a fusion, Seren spice with human garlic and grain. Jace raised an eyebrow. That's a crime? It is when tradition is law, she replied, her voice bitter. They said I dishonored the line, insulted the ancestors. She looked down at her empty bowl. They branded me impure and put me on a transport ship to the waste sectors. That's where you escaped from? She nodded. I broke the lock when they stopped to refuel, and I've been hiding ever since. Jace leaned back, arms crossed. Well, he said after a pause, you turned my boring stew into something people would actually pay for. Scylla smiled weakly. I just added some depth. No, you added soul, he corrected, standing up. Come on, we've got work to do. He led her to the prep counter and started laying out ingredients. Old veggies, dry herbs, some frozen noodles, nothing special. Let's make lunch for tomorrow, he said. Show me what you can really do. For the next 2 hours, Scylla came alive. Her hands moved like they remembered joy. She chopped faster than any human Jace had seen. She mixed things he never thought could mix. Blue root powder with onion oil, crushed Xiran pods with tomato base. The smells changed the air in the kitchen. It no longer smelled like survival. It smelled like dreams. Jace helped where he could, mostly watching, sometimes tasting. Each dish surprised him. Hot, cold, sharp, sweet, soft, bold. Every plate told a story, and Scylla told them without words. By the end, a full tray of meals sat under heat lamps, glowing like treasure. You just saved my business, Jace whispered, amazed. But before Scylla could respond, the front door buzzed. It was late, far past closing time. Jace frowned and wiped his hands. Stay here, he said, and walked toward the front of the diner. At the door stood a young alien, cloaked, eyes nervous. He looked around, then leaned forward. I heard there's something special on the menu tonight, he said softly. Jace blinked. We're closed. Please, the boy whispered. I've had nothing but rations for weeks. Jace sighed and waved him in. He didn't know why, but something in the boy's voice felt honest. He handed him one of Scylla's new dishes. The boy took one bite, and his face changed completely. Where did this come from? He asked, voice thick. Jace said nothing. The boy nodded slowly, then pulled something from his coat. It was a tiny silver token, etched with the seal of a smuggler guild. "If you ever need to vanish," he whispered, "show this to the red merchant at the docks." Then he left, disappearing into the shadows. Jace locked the door behind him and returned to the kitchen. Scylla was finishing a garnish on the last plate. "Friend of yours?" she asked lightly. "Maybe," he replied, holding up the token. "But he liked your cooking." Scylla didn't laugh, but she smiled for real this time. Not the weak, polite smile from before. This one had warmth. She sat down again and looked at him. "You didn't have to help me," she said. "You didn't have to let me stay." Jay shrugged. "I didn't do it for you," he said. "I did it for my kitchen." Scylla looked at the steaming dishes between them and whispered, "Then, maybe, this is the first kitchen that ever felt like home." Jace didn't answer. He just handed her another bowl, and together, they ate. Outside, the lights of the city flickered, but inside the diner, something quiet and beautiful had begun. The next morning, the diner smelled like something from another world. Steam rose from bowls of noodle stew with glowing red slices and green flakes that shimmered slightly in the light. The line outside the diner grew longer than Jace had ever seen. Dock workers, repair bots, cargo pilots, and even traders from other districts stood waiting quietly. Scylla moved fast in the kitchen, her hands focused, her mind sharper than ever. She had barely slept. Her thoughts kept going back to that night, the patrol, the smuggler's token, and the way Jace stood up for her. No one had ever done that before. No one had ever seen her as more than a tool. Jace handled the front, serving bowls and smiling like it wasn't strange that he suddenly had the best food in the sector. He didn't tell anyone about Scylla. She stayed hidden in the kitchen, just like she wanted. For now, later that afternoon, when the last customer left and the sign flipped to "closed," Jace leaned against the counter. "That was madness." He laughed. "We sold out before lunch was over." Scylla poked her head from the kitchen. Her apron was stained with spices and oil, her hair a little messy, but her eyes sparkled. "I want to try something new tomorrow," she said. Jace raised an eyebrow. "Newer than blue root soup and glowing spice eggs?" She smiled and pulled out a small metal box. It looked old and worn, with strange alien markings carved into the lid. "This," she said, "is a forbidden recipe." Jace blinked. "Like, cursed?" "Worse," she replied, placing it gently on the counter. "It's from the House of Saren's private collection, locked away in their memory vault." He leaned closer, curious. "You stole it?" "No," she said. "I memorized it." She opened the box. Inside were rare ingredients she had smuggled out, sealed in clear crystal wraps. One herb shimmered blue and gold. Another looked like soft red sand that danced when touched. "These are flavors not allowed to mix," she explained. "Not because they're dangerous, but because they bring out emotion." Jace looked confused. "Emotion?" Scylla nodded, her voice softer now. "They say this recipe makes people feel too much. Joy, sorrow, memory, love, all at once." She paused. "That's why they banned it. The house wants control, not chaos." Jace stared at the ingredients. "And you want to cook it here in my diner?" "I want to cook it with you," she said, looking into his eyes. He didn't speak for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "All right, let's break the rules." That evening, the kitchen became a different place. It wasn't just cooking, it was like painting with scent and fire. Scylla led, but Jace followed closely, helping with slicing, boiling, stirring, and blending at the perfect times. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. The food spoke for them. The dish took hours to finish, a rich stew that changed color as it cooled, a scent that made Jace remember his mother's kitchen, his brother's laugh the first time he ever held a knife and cut onions the wrong way. He looked at Scylla, her face calm, but her hands were shaking. "You okay?" he asked. "This recipe it carries weight," she whispered. "It remembers everything." Jace nodded and picked up a spoon. They both tasted the dish at the same time. For a second, nothing. Then everything. Jace gasped as warmth flooded his chest. Joy and pain mixed into one. He remembered falling in love once and losing that love. He remembered being hungry and alone. But most of all, he felt something new, like something lost had been returned. Sela covered her mouth, tears falling quietly. "I remember my first dish," she whispered. "I was just a child, but they praised me and I felt seen." Jace put his hand on hers. "You are more than your cooking," he said gently. She looked at him, eyes wet. "And you're more than a broken diner owner," she replied, smiling through tears. But their quiet moment was broken by a sharp noise. Clink, a small black device slid under the front door and stopped with a beep. Jace rushed forward and picked it up. It was a warning chip, blinking red. He pressed the button and a voice message played. Low and angry. "Return what is ours, human, or your little kitchen burns." Sila's face turned pale. "They know," she whispered. "They felt the dish. The house can sense when it's made." Jace didn't hesitate. "We'll hide it. We'll run if we have to." "No," Sila said, her voice steady. "We serve it." "What?" "If they're afraid of feelings, then let everyone feel it," she said, her hands closing into fists. "Let the whole city taste what the house tried to erase." Jace looked at her. This small, trembling alien who once cooked behind a dumpster. Now she stood tall, not as a fugitive, but as a fighter. He nodded. "Then tomorrow we serve the forbidden." And as the warning chip blinked red in his hand, Jace knew one thing. This wasn't just about food anymore. It was about freedom, flavor, and the fire that lived in both. By sunrise, word had already spread across Dock Sector 7. Jace's diner was going to serve something rare, something that touched the soul. Nobody knew what it was exactly. But people lined up anyway, pilots in dusty coats, dock workers with tired eyes, even officers off duty. They all came for the same reason. They were hungry, not just for food, but for something real, something that reminded them they were alive. Inside the diner, Jace flipped chairs down and checked the burners. Sila stood in front of the counter, hands behind her back, staring at the front door like it might explode. "They'll come," she said quietly. "Not just the hungry ones, but the dangerous ones too." Jace nodded. "I figured." He opened a drawer and pulled out the silver token, the smuggler's coin from the boy who visited days ago. It was their only chance to disappear if things went bad. "You sure about this?" he asked her again. Sila looked at the pot where the forbidden recipe simmered. The scent already filled the room, wrapping around the tables like soft arms. "I spent my whole life making food I wasn't allowed to taste," she said. "Now, I want everyone to taste what the house tried to bury." Customers flooded in. One by one, bowls were placed before them. The moment they tasted the dish, they froze. Eyes closing, hands shaking, some even crying quietly. A small girl laughed. Her mother began to hum an old song. An alien trader stood up and shouted, "I remember my brother. He died in the mines. I remember his laugh." Emotion poured across the room like warm fire. Jace and Sila worked side by side, filling bowls, wiping tears, sharing nods. But outside, someone else was watching. Across the street, in the shadows, a tall figure stood in a gray coat with sharp shoulders and a face half covered by a breathing mask. His eyes were cold and calculating. In his hand, a tablet blinked red, picking up the chemical pattern of the forbidden dish. The house had sent someone, an enforcer. He tapped a button on the tablet. From a nearby vehicle, 3 silent drones flew into the air, aiming straight for the diner. Inside, Jace noticed a flicker in the window. His gut twisted. "Sila," he said quickly. "We've got company." She didn't panic. She set down her ladle and calmly removed her apron. "Get the emergency vents ready," she said. Jace moved fast, hitting the hidden switch under the counter. With a hiss, smoke vents opened in the ceiling and poured out thick white fog across the room. The customers coughed and blinked, but Sila raised her voice, calm and clear. "Stay down, don't run," she said. "They only shoot if you move." The first drone smashed through the front window, red eyes glowing. It scanned the room, looking for her. Silas stood behind a pillar, heart pounding. Jace grabbed a tray and threw it at the machine. Clank, it hit the wall and sparked. The second drone flew in through the back door. This one had claws. It grabbed a bowl of stew, scanned it, and sent the data back to the enforcer. From across the street, the enforcer smiled. He raised his weapon and stepped toward the diner. Scylla made a choice in that moment. She stood up and walked. Into the open, arms raised, Jace yelled, "What are you doing?" "I'm ending this," she said. "They don't want me, Jace. They want the recipe." The enforcer stopped in front of her. "You have something that belongs to the house," he said, his voice cold and mechanical. "The recipe is our legacy." Scylla looked him in the eyes. "No," she replied. "It was stolen from the people who first made it. The farmers, the workers, the mothers who cooked it in clay pots." "You are a traitor," he said, raising the weapon. "No," she whispered. "I am a chef." Just then, someone inside the diner stood up. It was the old traitor, the one who remembered his brother. He held out a spoon and shouted, "This food gave me my soul back. If she's a criminal, then so am I." Another stood, and another. Soon the entire diner was filled with voices. "Leave her alone. She fed us. She made us feel again." The enforcer hesitated. He had orders, but even machines could see the tide turning. Scylla stepped forward. "You can take me," she said, "but you'll have to arrest everyone here too." The enforcer looked around at the full diner. Then, back at her, his fingers twitched. But then, click, he lowered his weapon. "This is not over," he said quietly, and turned away. The drones followed him back into the shadows, disappearing without a fight. Jace let out a long breath, his hand still gripping a kitchen knife. Scylla turned to him, her expression unreadable. "That was stupid," he said. "Brave, but stupid." "Maybe," she replied. "But it worked." Jace looked around. The walls were cracked, the windows shattered, but the smell of her food still floated in the air, and everyone in that room knew one thing. This place was more than a diner now. It was a place of truth. And truth, like flavor, could not be silenced. Smoke still clung to the diner's broken windows as night fell. Jace and Scylla worked quietly, patching holes with scrap metal and broken signs. The customers had helped clean after the attack. They left messages carved on the wall. "Thank you. You fed more than our stomachs. Don't stop." But both Jace and Scylla knew the danger wasn't over. The enforcer hadn't come to arrest her, not really. He came to test the reaction. And now, the house would make its next move. Scylla stayed up that night, sitting on the kitchen floor with her knees to her chest. She stared at the recipe box, the one she had carried in secret for so long. The flavors she once feared had now become her identity. She wasn't just a refugee anymore. She was the keeper of something powerful, something the house wanted to erase. Jace sat beside her, handing her a warm drink. "You know we can't stay here much longer," he said quietly. "No," she replied, "but I can't run again." He looked around the small kitchen. Burn marks on the tiles, broken shelves, smoke-stained walls. This place had been their home, and it had also become a spark for others. "You don't have to run," he said. "You just need to choose where you stand." Suddenly, a loud crack shattered the silence, then another. The back wall burst into flames. Someone had tossed a firebomb through the window. Jace leapt up, grabbed the extinguisher, and tried to smother the flames. But the fire was spreading fast, hot, wild, and full of fury. Scylla jumped to her feet, rushing to save the box of recipes and the special ingredients they had stored. The fire alarm screamed, but no emergency services came. No one answered in Sector 7. They were on their own. The fire reached the ceiling vents and exploded upward. The flames roared like a beast. Lighting the kitchen in orange and red, Jace pulled Scylla toward the front, coughing from the smoke. "We have to go," he shouted, "now." But Scylla stopped. She turned, eyes wide. Her spice pouch had fallen into the flames. The last of her rare ingredients, the herbs she smuggled out, were burning. She hesitated. Jace saw it. Her past, her pain, her pride, all trapped in that moment. And then he did something reckless. He ran back, leapt over the flames, grabbed the pouch and threw it to her. "Go!" he yelled as his sleeve caught fire. She screamed his name, but he was already rolling on the floor trying to put it out. She rushed back in, grabbed his arm, and dragged him toward the exit. They stumbled out onto the street, coughing and gasping. Just as the kitchen burst into a wall of fire behind them, the diner, their diner, was gone. People gathered outside, watching in silence. No one tried to stop the fire. No fire droids, no patrols. Just quiet stares and the smell of burning. Memories. Sila knelt beside Jace, his arm burned but not broken. He winced, looked back at the flames and said, "Well, I guess we're closed for the day." She didn't laugh, but her eyes softened. "You didn't have to go back for the spices," she whispered. "I didn't go back for the spices," he said. "I went back because you looked like you were about to run into the fire yourself." Sila looked down at the pouch in her hands. The edges were scorched, but the contents were still safe. It wasn't just ingredients anymore. It was her identity. The last proof of who she once was, and who she could still become. A soft voice came from the crowd. "You still got some of that soup left?" Jace turned his head. It was the little girl who had visited 2 days ago with her mother. Her eyes wide and hopeful, holding out an empty container. Sila smiled for the first time that night. "No soup today," she said. "But maybe tomorrow." The crowd didn't leave. They started offering things. Wood planks, leftover tools, even food. One man said, "I got an old stove in my garage." Another said, "You can use the space next to my junk shop. Rent-free." Jace looked around, surprised. "What is this?" he asked. Sila stood slowly, brushing ash from her dress. "It's not just a diner anymore," she said. "It's a voice." That night, they didn't sleep. They moved what was left of their supplies into an alley stall. They built a small canopy from tarps and metal sheets, a single table, 2 burners, and a reused sign that said, "Street of Stars, food that remembers." The first dish they served was simple, stew made from donated scraps, with just a touch of Sila's secret spice, but the line was longer than ever, and no matter how hot the flames had been, the fire in their hearts burned brighter. They had lost a kitchen but gained a community. And even as the shadows of the house crept closer, Jace and Sila knew they would never cook in fear again. The next morning, a soft breeze rolled through Sector 7, carrying with it the scent of something warm, spicy, and strangely comforting. The alley that had once been quiet and full of broken crates now glowed under makeshift lanterns. Jay stood behind a tiny counter built from scrap metal. Stirring a pot of stew on a borrowed stove, Sila crouched beside him, carefully crushing fresh herbs between her fingers. The smell lifted into the air and called out to the hungry, the lost, and the curious. They had no walls now, no chairs, no glowing signs, but people came anyway, not for comfort but for something that tasted like memory and truth. They called it the Street of Stars. Someone painted it on the cracked wall behind them, with silver paint that sparkled under the dim alley lights. The name spread fast. Pilots landed in nearby bays just to eat here. Dock workers brought friends and word traveled to other districts. Even a few well-dressed strangers came in secret, hoods up, looking for the girl who cooks feelings. Sila never bragged. She let her food speak. She cooked every dish as if it might be her last, and people could feel it in every bite. One evening, while closing up, Jace found a folded note near the stove. No name, no message, just a drawing. 3 glowing herbs tied together in a ribbon. His eyes narrowed. "It's a sign," he said, showing it to Sila. She froze. "It's the mark of a recipe duel," she whispered. "An old tradition, but used now only by assassins." Jace looked confused. "Like a cooking contest?" "Yes," she said. "But the loser doesn't go home, Jace. The loser disappears forever." That night, they didn't sleep. They cleaned every spoon, sharpened every knife, checked every spice jar. The next evening, the challenger arrived. He wore a dark robe with gold cuffs and carried knives in a leather roll that shimmered with alien runes. His name was Relkoth, once a master chef of the House of Seren. Now he stood before Sila, not as a mentor, but as her executioner. The house has allowed this final mercy, he said, unrolling his knives like a surgeon. Cook for the people, and let the dish decide your fate. A crowd formed around the stall, silent and tense. They had heard whispers of this strange tradition, where cooking was law and flavor was justice. Scylla stepped forward, unafraid. I accept, she said, but the rules are mine. Relkoth raised an eyebrow. Speak. 1 pot, 1 fire, 1 hour, she said. And you must use 1 human ingredient. Gasps moved through the crowd. Relkoth frowned. Very well, he said. Let the fire speak. 2 stoves were lit side by side. The crowd moved back, forming a circle around the 2 chefs. No words were spoken after that, only the sound of slicing, boiling, and oil cracking in hot pans. Jace stood by, heart pounding, watching her every move. Scylla moved like wind. Her hands fast, her focus like a flame that could not be shaken. She mixed human garlic with alien berries, poured broth over dreamroot, and sprinkled star salt with a shaking hand. Relkoth was calm, confident, using perfect cuts. His dish looked elegant, precise, like something made in a palace. When the hour ended, 2 bowls were placed on a small silver table. 5 tasters were chosen from the crowd. 2 humans, 2 aliens, and 1 hybrid child. They tasted Relkoth's dish first. Soft bites, balanced, rich with tradition. They nodded, impressed. Then they tasted Scylla's. The first taster paused, mid-bite. The second let out a quiet gasp. The third closed her eyes, tears forming. The fourth whispered, I remember my grandmother's voice. And the fifth, the child, smiled wide and said, It tastes like someone loves me. The crowd was silent, holding its breath. Then one by one, all 5 tasters pointed to Scylla. Relkoth lowered his head. You brought dishonor to the house, he said softly. But you brought life to the people. He rolled up his knives, bowed deeply, and walked away into the night. No attack, no fight, just silence. And then slow applause. Jace exhaled for the first time in an hour. He rushed to Scylla and hugged her. She leaned into him, exhausted. You won, he whispered. No, she replied softly. We did. The crowd cheered, and someone handed Scylla a basket of fresh vegetables as a gift. Another offered a broken food cart to expand their stall. A third left behind a note that read, You fed my soul, not just my stomach. And from that night forward, the Street of Stars wasn't just an alley stall, it became a legend. People said if you were lost or broken or running from something you couldn't name, you only needed to find the food that made you feel again, and if you were lucky, you'd find her. The alien girl with soft eyes and a human beside her who gave her a kitchen. And his heart. The sun rose slow over Dock Sector 7. It touched the alley with soft golden light, making the metal walls glow like gold. The smell of morning stew danced in the air, warm, spicy, filled with comfort. It came from the now famous stall at the end of the alley, where a battered hand-painted sign still read, Street of Stars, food that remembers. Jace stirred the pot with care, his arm still bandaged from the fire. Scylla stood beside him, sprinkling herbs into small bowls, her fingers moving with grace. The lines were longer now. Families, pilots, off-worlders, even diplomats from other sectors came quietly. They didn't ask questions, they didn't flash their badges. They came to eat and to feel, but not everyone had come to be fed. That morning, a black ship landed silently near the old shuttle depot. Its body was sleek, smooth, and carried no markings. From it stepped a tall alien woman dressed in shimmering gray robes. Her eyes were cold and sharp like glass. She was known only as Madame Virel, the House of Saren's whisper judge. And wherever she walked, secrets died. She entered the alley. With slow steps ignored by none, her presence was like ice through the spine. The line of customers parted without being asked. Jace looked up and stiffened. She's here, he whispered. Scylla turned, her heart beating faster. She had only heard rumors of Virel. Some said she could destroy reputations with a glance. Others claimed she could erase families from the records with a single word. The judge stepped forward and placed a small silver coin on the counter. It bore the seal of the house, split in two. "I've come to taste the rebellion," she said, voice calm. "Or end it." Jay stayed silent, but Sila nodded, reached into her pouch, and pulled out a handful of star pepper and silent root. She began to cook, right there in front of the judge. The pot bubbled, soft green broth rising with bits of gold dust and red threads. The scent was warm but layered, hiding sorrow under sweetness. She stirred with steady hands, her face calm. When it was ready, she placed the bowl in front of Varel without a word. The judge picked up a spoon, studied the dish, then took a bite. Everything stopped. The air felt still, the crowd silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Varel closed her eyes, and for the first time in many years, she remembered her childhood. Back before the house stole her voice and trained her to judge. She remembered laughter, sun, and the smell of soup in a clay pot. She lowered her spoon and opened her eyes slowly. "This is forbidden," she whispered. "Not because it is dangerous, but because it reminds." Sila looked at her, standing tall. "We all need to be reminded," she said, "of where we came from, what we lost, and what we can still choose to become." Varel stood there quietly, then reached into her cloak and pulled out a small black seal. She placed it on the counter. "An official pardon. For the girl who broke the rules," she said, "and for the human who gave her a place to stand." Jace stepped forward, shocked. "You're letting her go?" Varel nodded. "There's nothing to chase now," she said. "She doesn't belong to the house anymore." The crowd exhaled. Cheers broke out in waves, not loud and wild, but full of emotion. People clapped, some cried, some simply placed their hands on their hearts. The whisper judge turned and walked away. Her ship lifted into the sky and vanished into the clouds. Later that evening, Jace and Sila sat on the rooftop above their little stall. They shared a plate of roasted root bread and sweet grain, watching the stars blink in the dark sky. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "I used to dream of escaping." "And now?" he asked. "Now I dream of staying," she whispered. He smiled and held her hand. "I opened my kitchen," he said, "but you opened my heart." Sila chuckled quietly. "You humans always get sentimental when you're full," he laughed. "Only when the food tastes like freedom." Below them, the lights in the alley flickered on. A new sign was painted that day just beneath the old one. It read, "Free hearts served daily." And as more people arrived the next morning, drawn by scent, by stories, by something they couldn't name, Sila and Jace stood side by side, ready to cook again, not because they were rebels or heroes, but because somewhere between a broken kitchen and a whispered promise, they found something worth protecting. A place, a purpose, and the taste of freedom.